Some family traditions are sacred. Others are ravenous. Welcome to Hemlock House, nestled deep in the winding hollows of the Appalachian Mountains. A place where the past isn't just history, it's a hunger. My name is Nolan Cross, an ethnologist who thought he could simply observe. Instead, I found myself living by 4 strange rules just to survive a family reunion that was truly to die for. What's the weirdest family tradition you've ever heard of? Tell me in the comments below. And if you dare to accept the invitation to Hemlock House, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because here, the secrets aren't just told, they're consumed. Let the ceremony begin. I've spent my career documenting the strange, dying rituals of isolated communities, treating folklore and faith as data points to be collected and cataloged. I never, in my most arrogant academic projections, thought I'd become a part of the study. My girlfriend, Harper Wren, brought me home to her family's ancestral manor, deep in the winding hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, a place where time seems to have coagulated and thickened sometime during the Civil War. She gave me a handwritten list of 4 house rules on a piece of delicate yellowed stationery, her plea for my compliance evident in her lovely, worried script. Every dawn, knock 3 times on the front door before opening it. Never comment on the locked door at the end of the hallway. Don't sit in the armchair with a quilted blanket. Never ask your girlfriend about her great-uncle's disappearance. The air at Hemlock House is heavy, with the cloying scent of dried roses, beeswax, and a faint, sweet underlying smell of decay, like old books left in a damp cellar. The grandfather clock in the hall, a towering monolith of dark cherry wood, has hands that sometimes stutter, or even run backwards for a few seconds before correcting themselves. The last suitor Harper brought home, a banker from Charlotte. They said he just couldn't handle the isolation and left in the middle of the night. But when I was unpacking, I found a single mud-caked dress shoe under my bed, its expensive leather tongue neatly, almost surgically, cut out. My name is Nolan Cross, and my curiosity has always been my greatest virtue and my most damning flaw. As an ethnologist, Hemlock House was a living museum, a treasure trove. As Harper's boyfriend, it was a test, one I felt an arrogant certainty I could pass. Harper herself seemed to exist in a state of perpetual, low-grade anxiety within these walls, her city-bright confidence dimming the moment we drove past the ancient, wrought iron gates. The family was a study in Appalachian Gothic. The matriarch, Grandma Lydia, was a tiny, bird-like woman with a smile as sweet as molasses and eyes as sharp and ancient as shards of flint. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her hands wrinkled and papery, always busy with some knitting or mending. The father, Orrin Wren, was a tall, silent man, built like the mountain oaks outside. He was a former hunter, and his gaze followed me with a quiet, unnerving appraisal, as if he were judging my worth not as a suitor, but as livestock. And then there was Bobby, Harper's cousin, a young man of 19 with wild, intelligent eyes, rendered mute by a childhood accident the family refused to elaborate on. He communicated with a series of frantic gestures and by writing on a small, erasable slate he carried with him the rules I initially documented in my research journal as fascinating examples of apotropaic folk magic, likely meant to ward off perceived spiritual threats. I observed Harper on my first morning. She approached the massive oak front door, her face pale and serious, and knocked 3 distinct times on the wood from the inside. Thump, thump, thump. Only after the 3rd knock echoed into the house's profound silence did she turn the heavy deadbolt and open it to the misty dawn. It was a ritual performed with the gravity of a prayer. I followed suit, my own participation feeling like a performance for my hosts. I actively avoided looking at the locked door at the far end of the upstairs hallway, a heavy dark wood door with no keyhole, only a large, ornate iron lock. I skirted the forbidden armchair in the living room, a monstrous, overstuffed piece of furniture draped in a heavy quilt. The quilt itself was a disturbing work of art, a patchwork of faded fabrics intricately stitched together with something that, on closer inspection, looked unnervingly like different shades of human hair. And I never, ever mentioned Great Uncle Jonah, whose stern, unsmiling portrait was the only one in the hall that was draped with a small piece of black cloth. My first few days were a tense exercise in observation and feigned normalcy. I was the polite, academic boyfriend, while secretly my mind was racing, my journal filling with notes on their strange, insular world. But the house itself seemed to be observing me back. The silence had a texture, a weight. At night, it wasn't empty. It was full of small, furtive sounds. The creak of a floorboard in an empty room, the sigh of a closing door where no one was there. And then, late on the third night, I was awoken from a shallow, restless sleep by a sound from the living room directly below my bedroom. It was a soft, dry, rustling sound, the sound of tearing fabric. I crept from my bed, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. I eased my door open and peered down the grand, curving staircase into the moonlit living room. The room was empty. The family was all asleep. But the quilted blanket on the forbidden armchair, the one I had made a point of noting the exact position of earlier that evening, had been slightly, but undeniably, rearranged, as if a restless, unseen sleeper had just risen from its depths. A faint, sweet, cloying scent, like star anise, hung in the cold, still air. The rearranged quilt became another data point in my journal, another piece of the house's unsettling grammar. I was beginning to feel less like a researcher, and more like a mouse being observed in a very elaborate, very patient maze. The feeling intensified during my first formal family dinner. The meal was a quiet, tense affair. The only sounds the clinking of heavy silverware on porcelain, and Grandma Lydia's gentle, probing questions about my work, my family, my beliefs. Orrin, the father, remained silent throughout, his gaze fixed on his plate, a mountain of quiet disapproval. Bobby, the mute cousin, watched me with his unnervingly perceptive eyes, his hands still. After the meal, the ritual began. Orrin rose from the head of the table. "Tea," he said, one of the few words I had heard him speak. It wasn't a question. He went to a heavy dark wood sideboard and produced an ornate silver tea set, tarnished with age. He moved with a stiff, practiced grace, his motions precise, ritualistic. He warmed the pot, measured the loose-leaf tea, poured the water. It was a ceremony, and I was clearly the focus of it. Harper watched, her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. Orrin brought the first cup to me, placing it before me with a hand that was steady as rock. His eyes, cold and gray as a winter sky, met mine. It was a command. I picked up the delicate porcelain cup and drank. The tea was strong, a complex blend of bergamot and something else. Something earthy and slightly bitter, like dried roots. It was warming, but it left a strange, metallic tang on my tongue. I finished the cup and placed it back on its saucer. Orrin, who had been watching me intently, immediately refilled it from the silver pot and offered it to me again. The second cup. I was an academic, a guest trying to be polite. The cleaning felt like a breach of etiquette. I reached for the cup. Across the table, I saw Harper give a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. But it was too late. My fingers had already closed around the cup. As I took it, Orrin's face fell. The stony mask he wore cracked for just a second, revealing a flicker of what looked like profound, mournful pity. In the grand hall, just outside the dining room, the grandfather clock, which had been silent for days, let out a single deep, resonant chime. Bong. The sound seemed to vibrate in my bones. That night, the house truly came alive for me. My sleep was a fever dream. I had a vivid, terrifying hallucination that I was walking the upstairs hallway, and the stern, painted faces in the family portraits were turning to watch me pass, their eyes moving, their lips curling into faint, knowing smiles. The faint, sweet scent of star anise, the scent from the living room, was now thick in my bedroom, a cloying, funereal perfume. I awoke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the bitter, earthy taste of the tea still clinging to my tongue. The experience had been too real, too visceral, to be just a dream. Driven by a new, urgent fear, I began to inspect my room more closely. There were several old, framed landscape paintings on the walls, prints of the surrounding mountains. I took one down, and on the rough wooden back of the frame I found it. Scratched into the wood with a pin, so faint I almost missed it, was a single spidery line of text. The first of the hidden rules: accept the father's first cup, but never the second. The second cup of tea had been a key, unlocking a door in my mind I never knew existed. The house no longer felt merely watchful. It felt invasive. The whispers started the next day. They were faint, insidious things, riding the edge of my hearing, always sounding like my own internal monologue, my own thoughts. What's really behind that locked door, Nolan? Jonah didn't just disappear. They know. Ask them. She's not telling you everything, you know. Look at the quilt. Look closer. They were my own academic curiosities, my own suspicions, weaponized and whispered back at me. I became obsessed with the armchair. It sat in the living room like a squat, malevolent idol, the air around it palpably colder. I couldn't bring myself to sit in it, the public rule a screeching alarm in my head. But I was drawn to it. I would sit on the couch opposite, my journal open, sketching the intricate, disturbing pattern of the quilt. It was a masterpiece of folk art, a dark, unsettling tapestry, and I could now see with horrifying clarity that it was indeed woven from countless strands of human hair, of every color: blonde, black, red, gray. And that the small, pale, decorative buttons stitched into the patches were not buttons at all. They were teeth, human teeth, molars, incisors, canines. As I was sketching, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Bobby, the mute cousin, standing there, his eyes wide with a frantic urgency. He pointed at my journal, then at the armchair, and shook his head violently. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me towards the main fireplace. He seemed to be trying to tell me something vital. He saw my confusion, my academic mind trying to catalog his behavior instead of understanding it. Frustration flashed across his face. He let go of my arm, plunged his hand into the cold gray ash of the fireplace, and on the dark, polished floorboards, he wrote a single, desperate, dusty message, his letters shaky and stark against the wood. Don't let her feed you from the left. Don't let her feed you from the left. The second hidden rule, a warning aimed directly at the smiling, gentle matriarch of the house. He pointed at the words, then at me, then tapped his chest, his meaning clear. This is important. This is for you. He quickly smeared the words away with his shoe just as we heard Grandma Lydia's soft footsteps approaching from the kitchen. That evening, after another tense, quiet dinner, Grandma Lydia approached me as I sat reading in the living room. "Nolan, dear," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. "I baked my famous apple pie. You must have a slice." She held out a plate. On it was a generous wedge of pie, the crust perfectly golden, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples filling the air. It looked delicious, and she was holding the plate in her left hand. My heart hammered. It was a test. Bobby's desperate, ashen warning screamed in my mind. I forced a polite, apologetic smile. "Oh, that looks wonderful, Lydia. Thank you." But I couldn't possibly. I'm still so full from dinner. Maybe later. Lydia's own smile didn't falter. Not for a second. But her eyes, those ancient, flinty eyes, grew cold. A flicker of profound disappointment, of calculating resentment, passed through them before being masked again by her gentle grandmotherly facade. "Of course, dear," she said, her voice still sweet. "Another time, perhaps." She turned and walked back to the kitchen. The grandfather clock in the hall, which had been silent since the tea ceremony, remained so. I had passed the test, and in doing so, I had confirmed myself as a player in a game whose rules I was only just beginning to understand. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty old house. I had not earned a reprieve. I had only survived to face the next round. The close call with Grandma Lydia solidified my position. I was no longer a guest. I was a prisoner playing. My research was no longer academic. It was a desperate search for an escape route, for a weapon. I began a systematic, covert search of the house, my actions masked by my role as the studious, polite boyfriend. I feigned an interest in the family's extensive library, a dusty, book-lined room that smelled of decaying paper and secrets. My search focused on one thing: the ghost of great-uncle Jonah. Who was he? Why was his disappearance the one subject that was utterly taboo? Harper, when I tried to gently broach the subject, would shut down completely. Her love for me was a tangible thing, but it was walled in by a lifetime of ingrained fear and loyalty. "Please, Nolan," she'd whispered, her eyes pleading. "Just respect the traditions. Just for a few more days. For me." Her fear was so real, it was a warning in itself. She was as much a prisoner as I was. In the deepest, dustiest corner of the library, behind a row of crumbling theological texts, I found it. A hollowed-out book of sermons, and inside, a small leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked and brittle, the pages filled with a tight, spidery, desperate script. It was Jonah's. His journal began as a chronicle of his own suspicions about the family, about the house, about the armchair. He, too, had been a curious man. He, too, had started to unravel the rules. He wrote of the tea, of Lydia's offerings, of the whispers from the quilt. But he discovered the final piece of the puzzle, the one I was still missing: the telling of secrets. He described it as an annual family ritual, a night when the family would gather to feed the spirit of the house. Each member was required to tell a secret, something personal and true, to sustain the family's bond. His journal detailed the third and most important hidden rule, one he had learned too late. When they ask you for a secret, tell a lie. The entity in the quilt, he wrote, was a mnemivore, a memory eater. It fed on the psychic energy of confession. A small lie was an appetizer, enough to keep it placated, but a real, true, emotionally potent secret, that was a feast that gave it power. Jonah's final entry was a single page, the handwriting a barely legible, terrified scrawl. "Lydia served me the second cup. She knows I've been in her things. She knows I figured it out. Tonight is the telling. She looked at me at dinner. Her eyes, God, her eyes. They asked for my secret tonight. I was so afraid. I couldn't think of a convincing lie. So I told the truth. I told them I was afraid of her. God help me, I told the truth. The quilt, it's whispering my name. I'm so tired now. So very, very tired. I'm just going to rest for a moment. In the armchair. My hands were trembling as I closed the journal. He hadn't just disappeared. The family, led by Lydia, had fed him to their house. At the back of the journal, tucked into a leather sleeve, was a small folded piece of paper. It was a hand-drawn, amateurish rendering of the Wren family tree. I scanned the names, the dates, and then I saw it. In the generation of Lydia and her siblings, there were two names. One was Lydia. The other, next to hers, was not her brother. It was her husband. The name written in the same hand as the rest of the tree was Jonah. Great-uncle Jonah wasn't Harper's great-uncle. He was her grandfather. And Lydia, the smiling, gentle matriarch, had sacrificed her own husband to the thing in the chair. Just as this horrifying revelation hit me, I heard Harper's voice calling my name from the hallway. "Nolan, dinner's almost ready. Grandma Lydia is making a special farewell meal for you tonight. It's your last night." Her voice was bright, cheerful, and utterly, terrifyingly convincing. Harper's voice, so full of practiced, cheerful normalcy, was a discordant note in the symphony of horror that was now playing in my head. A special farewell meal. The words were a death sentence delivered with a smile. I carefully slid Jonah's journal back into its hiding place, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of fear and revelation. Jonah wasn't just a victim. He was Lydia's husband. She hadn't just sacrificed a family member. She had sacrificed her partner, the father of her children, to the whispering, ravenous thing in the living room. The family's longevity, its prosperity. It was all built on a foundation of his consumed soul. I walked out of the library, forcing a smile onto my face that felt like a brittle, cracking mask. The dining room was set for a feast. An antique lace tablecloth had been laid, the family's best silver polished to a mirror shine, and candles flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. It was a scene of warm, traditional family life, a perfect, beautiful lie. The scent of roasted meat, rosemary, and the sweet, cloying perfume of star anise hung thick in the air. At the head of the table, Grandma Lydia beamed at me. "Nolan, dear," she said, her voice dripping with affection. "Your last night with us. We couldn't let you leave without a proper send-off. A celebration. A celebration of what? My survival or my impending doom?" Dinner was an agonizing performance. I pushed food around my plate, my appetite gone, my every sense screaming that I was a lamb being fattened for a slaughter I was only just beginning to comprehend. Oren, the father, was even more silent than usual, his gaze distant, lost in a private, decades-old hell. Bobby, the mute cousin, refused to look at me, his eyes fixed on his plate, his hands trembling slightly as he ate. Only Harper seemed to be trying, desperately, to maintain the facade, chattering about my trip back to the city, about our plans for the future, her words a frantic, fluttering attempt to ward off the oppressive, ritualistic silence of the room. After the meal, Lydia clapped her small, delicate hands together, the sound like the snapping of dry twigs. "And now," she announced, her smile widening, her eyes glittering in the candlelight, "for a family tradition, a special one, to welcome Nolan truly into our fold before he leaves us. The telling of secrets." The room grew colder. The cheerful pretense of the meal evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating dread. This was it, the final test, the main event. Lydia led us into the living room. The fire was roaring in the hearth, but it offered no warmth against the profound, tomb-like chill that emanated from the corner where the armchair sat. The quilt, with its tapestry of human hair and teeth, seemed to almost breathe in the flickering light, its patterns shifting and writhing at the edge of my vision. The family arranged themselves in a semicircle around the chair. It was not a piece of furniture anymore. It was an altar, a throne for an unseen god. The spirit of this house, the love that binds our family. It must be nourished, Lydia began, her voice taking on a strange, hypnotic, liturgical cadence. It thrives on honesty, on trust, on the sharing of our innermost selves. We offer it a piece of our soul, and in return, it protects us, it keeps us whole. A beautiful, poetic lie to mask a parasitic, demonic truth. "Oren, my dear son," she said, turning to him, "you may begin." Oren looked up, his eyes glassy. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice a dry, unused rasp, reciting his 7 words for the day with the rote obedience of a prisoner. "I once wished I lived in the city," he mumbled, then fell silent, his duty done. A small, harmless lie, a crumb for the beast. Bobby went next. He used his slate, writing quickly, his chalk scratching loudly in the silence. "I stole a cookie yesterday." He held it up, then quickly erased it. Another crumb. Harper was last before me. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, then at her grandmother, her expression terrified. I once told a professor I had read a book when I hadn't," she said, her voice a small, tight thing. A lie. A safe, meaningless lie. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. The whispers, my own thoughts twisted and amplified, began to swirl in my head. Tell them what you did. The truth. You're a researcher. This is the ultimate data point. What are you afraid of?" Grandma Lydia smiled her gentle, terrible smile. "Your turn, Nolan. A real secret now. Something from the heart, to show you are truly one of us, to seal the bond of family." This was the moment, the precipice, Jonas final. Terrified words from his journal screamed in my mind. I told the truth. God help me, I told the truth. I knew I had to lie. I had to construct a believable, but ultimately meaningless, falsehood. But as I opened my mouth, my academic pride, my researcher's hubris, the part of me that had brought me to this house in the first place, waged war with my instinct for survival. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. What if Jonah was just weak? You're smarter, stronger. What really happens? Don't you want to know? Don't you want the data? The entity was tempting me with my own defining flaw. My insatiable curiosity. Harper, seeing the conflict on my face, tried to intervene. Grandma, maybe he doesn't... Hush, child, Lydia said, not unkindly, but with a finality that was absolute. She placed a hand on Harper's arm, and Harper flinched as if touched by ice. I took a deep breath, my mind racing to invent a lie, but my secret, the true, shameful secret that had haunted me for years, the one about the rival student whose career I had sabotaged with an anonymous tip. It rose up in my throat, hot and heavy with the potent, intoxicating poison of true confession. I broke. When I was in grad school, I began, my voice shaking, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I was jealous of another student. He was brilliant, better than me. I found a mistake in his research, a small one, but I reported it anonymously. It ruined his funding. It ended his career. The moment the truth, the real, shameful, emotionally charged truth, left my lips, the atmosphere in the room shattered. The air grew thick and heavy, crackling with a sudden immense charge of psychic energy. Grandma Lydia's eyes widened, her smile becoming a triumphant, hungry slash. She had won. The quilt on the armchair began to writhe, to visibly move, the strands of hair coiling and uncoiling like a nest of serpents. The scent of star anise became an overpowering, nauseating wave, and from the depths of the armchair, a cold, spectral voice. A voice I recognized from my nightmares of the well. The voice of Jonah, whispered, clear as day, for all to hear. I told the truth, too. The voice sighed, full of an eternal weary sorrow. It doesn't matter. It always takes you. The locked door at the end of the hallway, the one I was forbidden to comment on, began to rattle violently in its frame, the heavy iron lock screeching as if being torn from the inside. The feast was over. The god was awake. And it was coming for me. Yiternamo. Panmagchin. Kais. Atencharox. Very air in the room thickened, becoming a heavy, suffocating blanket of cold dread. The entity in the quilt, engorged and empowered by the raw, potent energy of my true confession, was no longer just a whisper. It was a presence, a palpable weight that pressed down on my shoulders, my chest, my very soul. I felt a profound, leaden exhaustion settle deep into my bones, a weariness that went beyond the physical. It was the weariness of a man who had just run a marathon and was being told the race had only just begun. Grandma Lydia watched me, her eyes glittering with a triumphant, proprietary light. She had her prize. Her 70-year vigil was nearing its end. The rest of the family, Orrin and Bobby, cowered in their chairs, their faces pale with a familiar, conditioned terror. They had seen this ritual before. They knew what came next. Only Harper seemed willing to fight. No, she screamed, finally breaking free from her grandmother's grip. She scrambled towards me, trying to pull me away from the magnetic, terrifying pull of the armchair. You can't have him. Not him. Not him. It is not my choice anymore, child, Lydia said, her voice no longer gentle, but imbued with a cold, ancient authority. It is the way of things. The house must have its anchor. The family must be protected. He made his choice when he spoke his truth. As Harper tugged at my arm, I felt the entity's influence lash out. It wasn't a physical blow, but a psychic one. A wave of pure, concentrated despair washed over her, and she collapsed, sobbing, her strength gone. The whisperer was isolating me, clearing the board for the final move. The rattling of the locked door at the end of the hall grew more frantic. the wood splintering, the iron lock groaning under an immense, unseen pressure. I understood now. That door didn't keep something out. It was a release valve. When the entity was fed enough power, it opened the door to claim its prize, to drag the chosen soul into its true domain. A timeless, silent place represented by that empty room. What is happening to me? I stammered, my thoughts feeling slow, syrupy, my own memories beginning to feel distant, like things I had read about in a book rather than lived. The inheritance, Lydia said, her voice softening into a tone of almost motherly instruction. The burden of the anchor. You will feel it now. The weight of all the secrets this house has ever held. The quiet whispers of all the souls who have contributed to our well-being. She gestured to the writhing quilt. You will be its keeper. You will feel its hunger. You will preside over the rituals. You will test the new blood. You will keep the family safe. It is a great and terrible honor, Nolan. You will keep us immortal. A profound, crushing psychic weight descended upon me, a tangible pressure in my skull. It was the feeling of a consciousness trying to merge with my own. I felt the entity's cold, ancient thoughts brushing against mine. I felt its immense, patient hunger. I felt the echoes of Jonah's despair, of the other souls it had consumed over the centuries. It was trying to fuse with me, to hollow me out and wear my consciousness like a suit. My own identity, my memories of my research of my life before this house, even my love for Harper, began to feel like fading photographs. I was becoming a vessel. Harper, seeing the light fade from my eyes, let out a final, desperate cry. Nolan, don't let it. Fight it. Tell another secret. A lie. Anything. Her voice, a single point of light in the encroaching darkness, gave me an idea. A desperate, insane gambit. The entity fed on secrets. It was a nemivore. It choked on paradox. It was time to give it a taste of its own medicine. But I was too weak now, my will almost gone. I needed a distraction. I needed to break the ritual's hold. My eyes fell on the grandfather clock in the hall. The arbiter, the keeper of the rules, its hands were spinning wildly, its pendulum swinging in a frantic, impossible arc. It was overloaded with the power I had unleashed. With the last ounce of my own will, I pushed myself away from the armchair's influence, stumbling towards the clock. The boy is fighting, Lydia noted with mild interest. He is stronger than Jonah was. This is good. He will make a fine anchor. I reached the clock. I didn't try to stop it. I did the opposite. I yanked open its glass case and, with all my remaining strength, I shoved the massive brass pendulum. I forced it to swing even faster, harder, pushing it far beyond its mechanical limits. There was a sound like a screaming, tearing groan of tortured metal, and then a loud crack. The pendulum snapped from its mooring. The clock, the magical arbiter of the house's rules, was broken. The effect was immediate. The psychic pressure lessened for a fraction of a second. The entity, its connection to the house's ritualistic order momentarily disrupted, let out a silent, psychic screech of confusion. The rattling on the locked door paused. It was the opening I needed, the single, desperate moment I had to save myself. In that precious fleeting moment of chaos, with the entity reeling from the breaking of its ritualistic anchor, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't fight it with strength. My will was a flickering candle against its hurricane. I couldn't fight it with truth. That was its nourishment. I had to fight it with its own twisted logic. It was a parasite that fed on the integrity of memory, on the emotional weight of a secret. So I would give it a secret so vast, so powerful, and so fundamentally poisonously untrue, that it would choke on the paradox. I turned from the broken clock to face the armchair, to face the swirling, furious energy of the whisperer. I looked at Grandma Lydia, whose face was now a mask of cold fury. I looked at Harper, who was staring at me, her face streaked with tears, a sliver of hope dawning in her eyes. I drew on every ounce of my life's experience, not just the memory, but the raw, visceral emotion of it. You want a secret? I shouted, my voice ringing with a newfound theatrical power. I'll give you the greatest secret of all. I took a deep breath, and I began to lie. But it was the most truthful lie I had ever told. I am not Nolan Cross, I began, my voice filled with a profound, sorrowful conviction. That is the name I stole. My real name is Jonah Wren. I am your husband, Lydia. I didn't die that night. I escaped. I used my knowledge of the house's ways to fake my own consumption, to leave a psychic echo in my place. I have spent the last 40 years in hiding, growing younger through my own rituals, waiting, watching, preparing to come back and reclaim my house and my family from the thing you bound us to. I pointed a trembling finger at Lydia. I came back, posing as a suitor for my own granddaughter, to test the strength of the curse, to see if you were still the same woman who sacrificed me for power. I looked at Harper, my eyes filling with a genuine, powerful love. But I had twisted it, and you, Harper, my dearest granddaughter, I am so sorry you were caught in the middle of this. It was a masterpiece of fabrication, constructed from the deepest emotional truths available to me. My love for Harper, my rage at Lydia, my knowledge of Jonah's fate, my own desperate fear. It was a lie built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated truth. The entity, the whisperer, could not process it. It surged forward, attempting to consume this enormous, potent new secret. But it was a paradox. It was a lie that felt completely, emotionally, psychically true. The entity tried to digest the truth of my love for Harper, but it was wrapped in the lie that I was her grandfather. It tried to consume the truth of my anger at Lydia, but it was poisoned by the lie that I was her long-lost husband. A lie wrapped in truth is poison to a mnemophore. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure psychic feedback, of a system crashing. It was being torn apart from the inside by the logical impossibility of what I had given it. The power it had drawn from my true confession now recoiled, turning on itself. The swirling mass of energy above the armchair became unstable, chaotic. It could no longer hold its form. It needed a vessel, but it could not take me, its chosen anchor, because I was now a paradox it couldn't solve. It could not return to the weakened, fading Lydia. The locked door at the end of the hall, its purpose now perverted, burst open. But it wasn't a gateway to claim a soul. It was now a vacuum. The entity's true prison, its pocket dimension, was now pulling its wounded, untethered master back home. The Whisperer, a screaming vortex of shadow and stolen memories, was ripped from the armchair and dragged, howling, down the hallway and through the open door. The door slammed shut with a sound of absolute, eternal finality. The grandfather clock in the hall gave one last, shuddering groan and fell silent forever. In the sudden, profound quiet, Grandma Lydia let out a soft sigh. The curse that had sustained her, the anchor that she had passed to no one, was gone. 70 years of unnatural life caught up to her in a single, horrifying moment. Her skin withered, her form shrank, and she crumbled into a pile of fine gray dust and a black mourning dress in her chair. The keeper was gone. The aftermath was a quiet, broken tableau. Orain, the father, looked around the room, his eyes slowly clearing as if waking from a long dream. He looked at Harper, and for the first time I saw him truly see her. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice cracking with a lifetime of unshed tears. I went to Harper, pulling her into my arms. She was real. The world was real again. But as I held her, I felt a strange, hollow emptiness inside me. The final image, months later. I am back at the university. I am not just finishing my doctorate. I am a phenomenon. My paper, Ritual as Sustenance, a case study of familial belief systems in isolated Appalachia, is being hailed as the most brilliant, insightful, and chillingly detached ethnological work of the decade. It has made my career. We sit in the university library, a place of logic and reason. She puts her hand on mine, her touch warm and full of a love I can no longer properly feel. "I love you, Nolan," she says, her eyes searching mine for the man she brought home. I look at her, I analyze her expression, the hope in her eyes, the slight tremor of her hand. I access the memory of what love felt like, the data point of that emotion. I process the appropriate response. Yes, I say, my voice perfectly calm, my tone even, my expression a carefully constructed mask of affection. All available data indicates that I love you too. I won. I escaped. But to weave a lie powerful enough to bind a demon, I had to offer up the very truths that made me human. I am the ultimate observer now, a man who can document the world with breathtaking clarity, but can no longer truly be a part of it. Hemlock House holds its secrets. Nolan Cross learned that some truths are too dangerous to tell, and some lies are the only way to survive. The rules were a cage, but sometimes a paradox is the only key. The Whisperer may be gone, but its hunger for truth has left a terrifying mark. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the chilling final twist. The true cost of Nolan's victory. The last few moments will leave you questioning everything. What do you think of Grandma Lydia's ultimate fate? What is the true nature of the Whisperer? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night at Hemlock House, if your secrets are still your own, then you're already part of our family. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some bonds are eternal, and the telling continues.